Hello, hello. Cole Butler here again, checking in for my second video journal. I thought it would be good from here to lay some background and framework for this whole kind of series. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how much detail I should go into because, you know, there's still a overarching question of, what's the point in this? Um, and there's a main focus I think that will come out of it, which is some of the difficult things I've faced. But yeah, I'll just kind of talk about growing up. So I was born and raised in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Which, if you're watching this and you're not from there, Hot Springs is mainly a tourist town in central Arkansas of about 30,000 people. Boyhood home of President Bill Clinton, interestingly. It has a lot of lakes and hiking trails, a vibrant art scene. It's actually partially nested within Hot Springs National Park. So it's a really, really beautiful place, but at the same time, there's not a whole lot of opportunities for young people here. So that makes it kind of difficult growing up here. If you want to get out into the world and do stuff, growing up for me, I always kind of was like, I gotta get the hell out of here from like probably 12 years old. But around the time I was 15, my parents divorced, and that led to some behavioral troubles, I would say. Maybe that's just part of being a teenager, but I don't think it's everybody's experience. I started experimenting with drugs and alcohol sooner than I probably should have, probably sooner than most people would, at about the age of 15, smoking weed and even doing psychedelics like 15, 16 years old. And I, got into some trouble. In particular, I got arrested. I mean, arrested's not really the right word. I got a citation for graffiti vandalism. It was a big interest of mine. I was drawing a lot of graffiti on my own, and then I would do what's called bombing, which is just like quickly getting your name out there, going around town, kind of putting my name up there, and yeah, this eventually got me in trouble, which was an eye opener. I went through the criminal justice system, and it worked, essentially, to some degree. I definitely didn't want to do graffiti after that anymore, but I still had some artistic interest. So, strangely enough, I got into men's fashion. And I just started learning a lot about it, what makes a good outfit. Was online shopping, thrift shopping, trying out new stuff, posting outfits online. And that was a really cool hobby for me to go through. But eventually, I got to this point where I was like 17 years old, and I quit caring about dressing nice anymore. And I started getting really deep into like designer stuff online. And I was like, okay, well, I don't even care about dressing nice, and I can't afford this high-end designer stuff that I'm learning about. And it just became sort of abstract, and I kind of lost what I enjoyed about it. So from there, essentially, I actually started getting into cars. I got my own car, an Acura CL, and I started modifying it, and that led me down a whole path to having like 20 cars, which was interesting. So I had got a turbo Mazda Miata, a turbocharged Miata, and I got really into that. I started a car community in Hot Springs. There was a lot of drama there, but it was fine. But then I got rid of the Miata and I got a turbocharged Honda Civic, and that was making about 300 horsepower, but it was way too much car for me. At this time, I was in college in Hot Springs at National Park College on a path to study mechanical engineering, just kind of assuming that's what I would do because I was good at math and science, and since I was like 11, I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. Growing up, I always kind of heard, well, society needs more engineers. But when I got to engineering school, actually, after that, I found out that there was a lot of engineering students, and I actually didn't care about engineering. But anyway, skipping around a little bit there, but so got into the cars, messed around with a lot of them, traded a lot of them, never really did it right, I would say. I was always trying to get the next hot thing, so I wouldn't hang on to a car, I wouldn't do enough of the required kind of maintenance stuff, and I would focus a lot on the flashy stuff. But anyway, so the cars ended up transferring into motorcycles. I got a Ninja 250 on a trade, and that was pretty fun. I rode that thing until I felt like I really was ready for an upgrade. And then I got a Suzuki DRZ 400. And if you don't know what that is, it's fine. I'm not going to go into too much detail and bore you. But anyway, so I got into motorcycles, and then, as I mentioned, I was in engineering school at that time. I was in a program that was 2 years in National Park College, a 2-year college, and then the idea was that the last 2 years would be at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville. So I did my 2 years at National Park College, and then I transferred after that to University of Arkansas. But I had some troubles with the motorcycle, and unfortunately the piston rings went out on it, and I didn't have very much money. I had an old truck, and I came to the conclusion at that point that I wasn't going to be able to afford to fix my motorcycle and bring it with me to Fayetteville, and it was time to move. So I had to sell the motorcycle at a loss. But then I moved to Fayetteville, and I kind of went through this period of kind of saying, who am I without a car or a motorcycle? I started to have this difficulty because I kind of expressed my ego and the person I was through the cars and the bikes, and it was always like something I liked, but I felt like my personality was embedded within this external thing, whether it be a motorcycle or a car. But I just wasn't in a position to own one anymore, so it led me to this kind of difficult place mentally of saying, who am I? And so, at that point, it just became time to focus on school. I had some troubles with a job. Actually kind of got involved in a multi-level marketing thing. I went through the training, and on the first day of work, I realized that it was an MLM, and I left, and that was pretty scarring a little bit. I mean, it wasn't crazy, but it wasn't great either. And then I thought that I was going to work for a scooter company as their mechanic, and then they screwed me over as well. I won't get into that, but I didn't get a job, and I decided to start selling some wax, which, if you don't know what that is, It's basically a marijuana extract. So yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, but I needed some money. But I ended up smoking away a lot of my profit, which was not good. And so, yeah, I realize I'm being very transparent here, but I'm fine with it because that's in the past. And I don't do anything like that. I wouldn't dream of doing anything like that now. But it was college. I did it. I can't take it back. But I started to hang out with some people that I went to high school with who were kind of more in the party scene, and we ended up, doing a lot of psychedelics, going to a lot of music festivals, and just partying a lot. And that was kind of my first semester in engineering school, and I was doing like pretty well in engineering school, like for an engineering major, but I just didn't enjoy it. It was boring. It was boring. So basically, I was having this kind of internal crisis of, I don't really want to do this with my life, but what do I want to do with my life? And I didn't know. And I had been learning a lot about spirituality at that point. I kind of in the background had my own kind of spiritual exploration going on. I was reading some books and things, like the first book that I read in that kind of domain was by a guy named Ram Dass, and it was actually called Embracing Aging, Changing, and Dying. And I thought, this is really weird. Like, I think when I read it, I was 18, and it was for, like, people who were about to die, old people, helping them accept that it was, it was coming. And so I was like, well, this doesn't seem like a book for me. But it opened up the door to me thinking about dying and my own death. And that kind of opened up a different world of experience for me. Plus, I'd been having some kind of strange experiences that I couldn't really explain. Like around that time, I think actually right before I got that book from Ram Dass, I had an experience called an out-of-body experience, and I didn't know what it was at the time. I'll see if I can recall it off the top of my head, but essentially I was really sleep deprived, and I remember I drank like a Red Bull or something to help me stay awake, but I was really tired. And I went to go lay down in my bed, and I laid down and I closed my eyes, and I was just trying to relax. And I felt like my soul had left my body, like there was this lifting up. And it was like the me that was experienced was above my physical body. And then I heard this loud pop just to the side of me, basically, like it was in the air. And I didn't know what that was. And so I looked around and I was like, like what is in the room that might have popped like that? And there was just nothing. Like, I know it probably sounds like, there was probably something. But at the time, there was nothing that would have made a loud pop. And then I came back to, and I was like, well, what the hell was that? And I ended up talking to a friend. He was like, it sounds like you had an out-of-body experience. I'm like, oh, what? And I looked it up, and sure enough, there's these things called OBEs. And then I was reading about them, and it said, well, sometimes when this happens, you'll hear a loud pop, and it's the soul re-entering the body. And I'm like, that sounds crazy, but I didn't have any other explanation. I'm not saying now that that's what happened, but it opened up this door to this curiosity about what else is going on that I can't explain, and what's this strange experience. And so that kind of opened the doors to a different way of thinking about life. And I should mention that my mom is big into yoga, and she's now a yoga therapist. So she had learned a lot about Eastern philosophy, and she had the book, Embracing Aging, Changing, and Dying, that I mentioned on her shelf. So at that point, I picked up that book and I read it, as I mentioned. And it opened the door to like I said, thinking about things in a different way, having this sort of internal spiritual kind of dialogue going on. And so another thing that was happening at the time related to all this was what I call angel numbers. And some other people might have heard of these, but I went to a therapist when I was like 16 or 17 because I was having problems getting over my first girlfriend, my first breakup after like a year. And I don't even remember why, but she told me about these things called spiritual numbers, and I thought, that sounds a little crazy. Or, I'm sorry, angel numbers. And so she basically said that these things are like whenever you might like wake up in the middle of the night and you look at the clock and it says 3:58, and then maybe you're driving the next day and you hear on the radio the number 3:58, and you happen to look at your clock that day again and it's 3:58 again, and just kind of these different like synchronous experiences of this one number. And so basically whenever this happens, it's like it's a message from the other side. And so I was just like, okay, well, I'll look into it. And so sure enough, it started happening, and I got to where I would see numbers and then I would just Google them, angel number 3:58. And so when you Google it, it has some information like, what does this mean? What's going on in your life? And this eventually got to a point where, it was just like I would see the same number like again and again and again and again, like the same number like 5-6 times a day, like every day for like months. And there was one number in particular, I won't say what it is for reasons, but yeah, I was seeing it everywhere for months, and this preceded all of this kind of change in career that I'm leading up to. And so I had this whole thing going on where I was starting to learn about spirituality and my own death, and just different ways of looking at the world. And I was open-minded to all of this stuff. And then basically, this all led up to an experience where I came back home. This was the first time I lived away from home for like 6 months in college. Came back home after my first semester at university, and I did acid. And I want to omit any of the names in this story, but I was with a very, very, very close friend, and somebody that he had just happened to have met. And we were going to see the person that at the time was selling us weed, our weed dealer. And our weed dealer at the time was a very nice guy. He was basically kind of like a father figure to us, because he was older and he had really cool stuff. He did live in a trailer, but he kept it extremely clean. He kept all of his stuff clean. And he was interested in things that we were interested in, and he helped give people direction like young people who didn't have direction. Some of the time, people would come by his house and they would essentially like need some work, and he would give them some work. He did like lawn work, landscaping stuff. And anyway, so a friend of my best friend became involved with this guy in that sort of capacity. And well, like I said, it was all kosher at the time that it was happening. But yeah, things went downhill in the time that I left and came back. And so that night, my friend, my best friend, and the new friend came over to see the drug dealer, and this other guy was over there. He came over there later. So when we got there, we came inside and all the lights were off, and that was kind of strange. There was an electrical cord ran from the drug dealer's mom's trailer to his trailer to power on the TV and the stereo, but there was a blanket that was dividing the living room and the kitchen and the bedroom, and that was sort of suspicious. Didn't know why. But anyway, so we get over there, and my best friend and the new guy are all on acid. And the drug dealer's like, "Oh, so you guys are on acid? Well, let me put on some music." So he puts on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And he said, "Well, every time I put this on, people have a bad trip." And we're like, "Okay, well, don't put it on then." And, well, what does he do? He puts it on. So that was already kind of a bad omen. But what are you going to do? And so, anyway, it was shortly after that the new kind of, let me use a pseudonym here. Let's call him Jeffrey, which is a completely unrelated name. And sorry, I keep touching my face. I have cat hair on my face because my cat was inside. But anyway, so Jeffrey was one of these guys that the drug dealer would have around to help out with stuff. And he was involved in whatever shady stuff was now going on, which we later learned after the fact was that there was meth being cooked at that house. And I realized, I'm saying all this and it sounds crazy. And it is crazy. And, but that was life. That was my life. That was what happened. Again, this isn't my life at all anymore. This was in the past. And I didn't ask to be in a house where meth was being cooked. I was smoking some weed because I had started smoking weed and I had gotten into that because I was a troubled teen and I continued to smoke weed like many people do. And I just thought I was going over to the friend who sells weed's house. And I realized drug dealer is kind of demeaning, but I don't mean it in a demeaning way. I'm just saying that to give him a title in the story so I don't have to come up with a bunch of silly names that you have to keep track of, like Jeffrey. So, anyway, Jeffrey comes over, and the vibe is already dark and weird, and me and my best friend are talking like old friends, and we're comfortable with each other because we're old friends. But the new guy is very impressionable. And when I say new guy, I mean the best friend's friend, not Jeffrey. And like I said, he was on acid as well. And so new guy was not fitting in, but he was impressionable and he wanted to be liked. And it was very apparent, but he didn't have the connection, so he felt out of place. And so essentially that made the vibe very weird, and it got even weirder when the new guy, Jeffrey came over. When Jeffrey came over, it got even weirder. Because Jeffrey now wants to impress the drug dealer and the new guy and us. And that made things extremely uncomfortable. So, in particular, there was this light, and it was like a half dome light, right? And it changed colors. And it was used as a kind of display to put your drug glassware on, weed glassware. And so Jeffrey picks this up, and he's like, "Ooh, look at this, so trippy." That's not what he said, but he was being that weird and awkward. And it's even weird and awkward when I'm doing it into the camera. But imagine if this guy is taking himself seriously, trying to make you be like, "Whoa, that is trippy." So it's painful. And so anyway, that made the vibe way more uncomfortable. And then, that was just one thing I remember, but this is the whole situation, the whole time. This kind of thing's going on. And from there, basically, what happened was I was wearing this blue V-neck shirt, and nobody else was wearing a blue shirt. And this guy, Jeffrey, he's got this fancy new weed contraption called an e-nail. And if you smoke weed, you might know what that is. But he wanted to show off his e-nail. And so he's like, "Hey, Cole, why don't you hit a dab off this e-nail?" And I'm like, "No, thank you. I'm good." And I was good. And he started making a big deal out of it. He wanted everybody to hit his e-nail. And then he goes, "That dude in the blue shirt is a bitch." I'm the only one in a blue shirt. And like I said, we're just all sitting here. He says this right in front of us. And I'm like, how freaking strange, dude. What? At this point, my mind is blown. Because I'm like, this guy is being weird. And he was being weird. So the situation got weirder and weirder until about 11:30 at night. It was tense. And the drug dealer and Jeffrey were popping in and out of the trailer and popping behind the curtain. And at some point, they just went outside, probably just to smoke a cigarette or something. But when they left, it kind of just left me and best friend and new guy on the couch. And we were all so visibly tense and uncomfortable that we just had to leave. And we didn't want to leave because we were on acid. You don't want to leave when you're on acid. You want to be comfortable. You want to be in a safe, supportive environment. That wasn't what this was. And so I had to make the call. I had to say, we got to leave. And I really didn't want to, but I had to. And so we left. And we got in the car, and it was like drizzling, raining. And my friend at the time had a Mercury Grand Marquis. And it was like a 99. And if you don't know this car, it's basically not a car, it's a boat. It's a car, but it's a boat. It drives like a boat, and his tires were really bald, and he needed an alignment, and it was raining, and I was on acid, and I was the one driving. And so I'm driving home, and I'm on like the main highway in Hot Springs, and I'm going like 45 in like a 65, because I can't go any faster because it was dangerous. And I knew by going this slow, I was also like putting us at risk of getting pulled over. And of course I'm on acid, so my pupils are like dilated. And so the new guy gets dropped off. Somehow I end up home. And I'm up in my room, and at this point, I'm just like having an anxiety attack, basically. Not an anxiety attack, but I'm having anxiety. Because I'm like, what in the hell just happened? And I'm trying to make sense of it all in my acid torn brain. But I mean, I still had some coherence, And I had this realization, this eureka realization, something that I'd never considered before. And it was that I wanted to study psychology. And this wasn't anything that I'd considered. Like, it never even crossed my mind. Like, psychology, I'd never taken a course in psychology. In my high school, they didn't talk about it. In my undergraduate, up to that point, they didn't talk about it. I'd never done anything like that. I was in, like, technology and engineering, math, physics. That was, like, my whole bent. Mechanical stuff, that was me. And so psychology never crossed my mind, but I realized that night that I wasn't thinking in the same way that Jeffrey was thinking that night. And I was so perplexed by Jeffrey's behavior. And it was like the acid allowed me to see past the veil of what was going on with Jeffrey and how strange he was being. And so my thought that night that I came to was like this eureka moment of like everything coming together and me being like, okay, I get it. I don't want to study engineering. And then I've been having this whole kind of spiritual understanding coming about. I don't want to say awakening because that's just like, ugh. But I was having this kind of spiritual outlook on life emerging, and I realized that the way that I'm thinking about the world and the way that Jeffrey thinks about the world are two different things. And I wanted to be able to help people like Jeffrey see the world differently. And so basically I decided that night that I was going to change my major, and I knew that some major shift was coming up because of that number that I mentioned that kept occurring and occurring and occurring every day for months, multiple times a day, every day for months. And it suggested that a big shift was coming up. And so it sounds crazy, but based on that, I changed my major. And this was like I said, over Christmas break, and I knew what I had to do, and I told the university basically that I wanted to change my major, and I did. And it was almost too late after course enrollment to get in all the courses I wanted because there's a lot of people in psychology. But so I ended up like taking physics courses. Like I took a modern physics course, which is in like quantum mechanics, and I was taking high-level math because I just decided, I'll get my math minor since I've already taken so much math. But I was able to get my first couple of psych courses and like foreign language in there. But anyway, like a couple of weeks before this happened, or a few weeks before, maybe on Thanksgiving break, I don't remember exactly, but I was at that guy Jeffrey's house, and he showed me this pistol that he had that the drug dealer had bought him, and I held it in my hand. He's like, hey, check it out, and I'm like, oh, cool, here you go. And so I was like, why does he have one? Well, he'd gotten into some trouble, I guess, and the drug dealer wanted to protect him, so he got him a pistol. And I'd known from the past that this guy Jeffrey, he had been kind of around some people that aren't good to hang around. I'll just put it that way. He had come from a little bit more of a privileged life himself, but he hung around with people that he probably shouldn't have been hanging around with. And anyway, so he had a pistol, and he had been robbed at one point. And I know that he felt pretty sensitive about it. He was selling weed and he got robbed, and he did not appreciate it, and so that probably had something to do with the pistol. And so, basically, after all this stuff shook out, and I changed my major, a week or two later, I find out that somebody tried to rob Jeffrey in a weed deal. And they pulled a BB gun on Jeffrey, and Jeffrey pulled his real gun, and he shot 2 people, shot one in the leg, and killed the other one. And now Jeffrey is in prison, or he might have just gotten out on parole or something, I don't know. But, that's crazy. But it was validating. As terrible as that is, it was validating because it was like, well, clearly something was going on with Jeffrey to lead to that situation. So, yes. That's why I changed my major. And that was about 5 years ago. And we're pretty deep into this now, so I'm going to go ahead and end it there. But that's kind of everything that leads up to me changing my major to psychology. And I promise that's all of the bad stuff. Well, not all of the bad stuff, but all of the I'm getting involved with drugs stuff. And I know, and I'm sorry, and I know it sounds bad if you're listening to this and you're like, Cole, you're a druggie. Please, forgive me. I know, and that's not my life. So that's in the past. I was young, I was stupid, life happened, but that's just not who I am anymore at all. But it showed me all this. It allowed me to have this clarity of vision. And so, yeah, that leads me to switching my major in psychology and who I was before all of that. And I think in the next episode, I will pick up on what happened after I changed my major, and my education in psychology and getting into research and graduating and all that stuff. So if you're listening, great, thank you, I appreciate it. I honestly can't imagine anyone would listen, because to me it's like, what does anybody have to gain out of this other than like just listening to me? But if you find it interesting, then great. I feel like maybe nobody will watch this, and then it'll just be there. And then someday I'll look back on it and I'll go, oh yeah, I told that story. I just want there to be a record of this stuff, really. So anyway, if you're still here, thanks, and I'll see you next time.